Happy New Year, happy holidays, everybody. Today we're taking a look back at some of the most compelling conversations we've had this last year around the case against Bryan Kohberger.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Brueski.
We are talking today with one of our favorite guests, clinical and forensic psychologist Joan E. Johnston is here. And let's dive into this, talking about a specific angle in the Bryan Kohberger case. And I want to talk about the kind of the psychology of where we put dollar values on people who are incarcerated. It's looking like if Kohberger is convicted and sentenced to death, it would cost about $1 million more from that point to actually death than it would if he were just to be incarcerated for the rest of his life, if in fact he's guilty. A lot of people think it's the other way around. The argument's usually made, well, why are we using that taxpayer money to keep them around? It actually costs more to execute someone. This is an interesting one, and how does it play into, I guess, the outlook on this case and the psyche of the individuals that are close to it, the victims' families and such, and the greater public?
Well, I certainly think it is a very common belief that the death penalty is a lot cheaper than paying for somebody to be in prison every day for years and years and years. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of statistics and research that says the exact opposite. I think I've never really seen it broken down on a spreadsheet.
Sure.
I imagine that the appeals process is so lengthy.
Yeah.
And so involved that, number one, people, aren't likely to be put to death for 20 years, even if they are on death row. And then you think about all the appeals process and all that. And when you parse it out, it is pretty clear that the death penalty or carrying out the death penalty is much more expensive. I don't think that's a consideration, I think, an argument people often make. But I do think for the most part, for most people, the death penalty is really about emotions. It's really about this sense of justice and the sense that this is somebody who's committed a horrible crime. So I'm talking right now about somebody who is on death row, not necessarily this person. Of course, Bryan Kohberger has not been convicted, but should he be convicted of a horrible crime, then I think there are plenty of people who say, yeah, this person has taken life, so his own life should be taken. And, I think you and I've talked before about the fact that families are really diverse in terms of how they feel about it.
Sure.
And it doesn't seem to depend upon the crime or who was lost or whatever. It really does kind of come down to that person's often spiritual beliefs and values.
How does that work when you have something like this, where you have 4 different families that have all the opinions on, whether or not this person should be facing the death penalty? Some saying yes, some saying no. There's really not a true way to I guess, make everyone satisfied with what the outcome could possibly be if convicted.
I think you're right. It's a very difficult decision. I mean, ultimately, prosecutors are the ones who are going to decide whether to go for the death penalty or not, or to pursue it. And I think oftentimes prosecutors meet with the families, I would hope so, and take their wishes, their thoughts, their opinions into consideration. And then they have a lot of other things that they're considering. It can be anything from, what's likely, do they think it's going to reduce the chances this person's going to be convicted? What are the politics involved? I mean, there's all kinds of things, I think, to come into play. What is the public perception? What is the media kind of climate? There's all kinds of things, probably spoken and unspoken, that are taken into consideration when a prosecutor decides to pursue the death penalty or doesn't.
I completely agree. Let me ask you about this with the 2014 arrest that we've learned about of Kohberger stealing from his own sister, his dad actually turning him in. This is right after he got out of rehab for heroin addiction. Does this tell us anything about the personality of the Kohberger that is alleged to have committed those murders in the last year when we compare it to what we know about a 2014 version of Kohberger stealing from their own family?
Well, I mean, I think it tells us a lot about his family. It does. And it probably tells us more about his own family than it does about him.
Yeah.
Because obviously most people who steal things don't commit murder, certainly don't murder 4 people. or commit a violent crime. But I think it does speak in a lot of respects highly, I think, of his family in terms of holding him accountable in that situation for something that he did wrong.
Sure.
And one of the things that's been difficult, I think, I've heard a lot of psychology talk about his family. And I think it's important for us to remember that, they aren't on trial. They didn't do anything wrong per se.
Very much so. And it does make you wonder. We have heard nothing from them. And it's not that often that you have a situation like that where the family's not really going to speak out when their loved one is accused of such crimes. But it is interesting to see how they have in the past held him accountable for wrongdoings. And it does kind of make you wonder where they're at today. They've not shown up for any of the hearings that have been public that they could have gone to for supporting. I'm wondering from your observations, and this is just conjecture, where do you think they may be in terms of their stance on their son?
Well, I think they're like most parents who will love their child no matter what. But there's a lot to grapple with here.
Sure.
And, I've mentioned to you before, I have a 28-year-old son, just like Bryan Kohberger, and I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old daughter. And I cannot imagine being in their situation where I have a son who has been accused of something so heinous. There seems to be quite a bit of evidence against him. And so I think they are having to navigate the shock, the horror, the grief, and all of that. And so I don't know that we can make a lot of assumptions about what it means for them not to show up. Could it be that they want to send a message they don't condone what he did? That's possible. Could they send a message they can't bear to go and hear some of the accusations against him? Sure. Yes. Yeah. Could it be both of those? Absolutely. So I think we'll get more information probably about what his family is thinking and feeling as the legal process continues. But I think from a family perspective, they are really having to grieve the loss of a son probably in the way that they thought he was. Yeah. If he did, in fact, do these things. And also face a lot of public outrage themselves, and finger pointing, because, we all want to know why a person did something. And it's certainly, understandable to some extent that we start looking at their family, looking at their childhood, looking at their upbringing to kind of figure out, okay, what happened? Yeah. Where did things go wrong?
Yeah, very, very much so.
You're locked into the Hidden Killers podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.